Again, thank you for joining us today for the Sage 100 Purchase Order Tips and Tricks session. And today, there's so many different things that we could talk about related to purchase order. So I'm going to cover a few real basic things, and then the main focus is going to be on why purchase orders remain open, that they don't automatically close, why they aren't purged out when they are closed, and how to clean things up. That seems like we get a lot of questions about that on our support line. So I wanted to cover that today and go through this information. So the first thing that we're going to do is in purchase order, just want to briefly show you the different types of purchase orders that you can enter. Most of us, if you do use the purchase order module, you know that you can do standard orders, which is what most everyone does. But also, the system has the ability to do drop ships, and you would use a drop ship if it's being sent directly from your supplier or directly from the manufacturer to your client. The key thing about making sure that your inventory does not get out of balance if you do drop ships is that if you're using the sales order side, you need to show that that item is being drop shipped as well, so that the system never expects it to be received into your inventory or to be shipped out of your inventory. You also can do master orders and repeating orders. And the difference between those two, a master order would be used in a situation where maybe you contact your supplier and you say, okay, in 2016, we're probably going to order 10,000 widgets. What kind of price break can you give us? We don't need all 10,000 at once. We aren't going to order a set amount each month. So they give you a price for those 10,000, and basically then you set up your master order for 10,000 of those widgets, and then as you order them from the vendor, you will issue standard orders referencing that repeating master, or referencing the master order. And we'll go through one of those in just a second. The other thing that you can do is a repeating order. And a repeating order is more of a situation where maybe you do get a price break, but you say, hey, we're going to order 100 a month. So that what you're basically doing is creating the template or the shell of the purchase order, and then each time you want to order it, you just generate a PO against that repeating order, and then it automatically fills in the blank, the item numbers, and the quantity. So if you're doing a master order, and we'll just run through one of these very quickly, you're going to set it up just like any normal purchase order. So we'll have 1,000 desks here, and we will go ahead and accept this. So basically, you now have that master order in the system. If you did a lookup of your purchase orders, you can look down and you'll see where I've created this, and it also has a type of M, which means master order. If it shows S, it's standard, and if it shows an R, it is a repeating order. So let's say that I've created my master order at the beginning of the year, and now I'm ready to issue a PO for my March order. What you're going to do is you're going to issue the standard order against the master, and then it also keeps track on the master order as to how many have been ordered against it. So if we look at the master order, and go back to the lines, you can see that my original quantity was 1,000 and I have 750 left on that master order. And basically a repeating order would work the same way. You're going to issue a standard order and reference that repeating order number. So just wanted to kind of briefly run through and show you the different types of purchase orders that you can use, or that you, yes, the different types that you can use. And then wanted to touch base. We'll talk more about this in the webinar coming up in a couple of months, where we're going to touch on Paperless Office and some of the other features and functionalities in the Library Master module. But with Paperless Office, you can also set it up to automatically email from within your Sage 100 to email those POs to your vendor. So I know a lot of times people now, it's easy to PDF it and then email it over to your vendor. But through Paperless Office, you can set it up to have it automatically send that purchase order directly to your vendor when you go through that printing process. So you're not having to save it to a PDF and then go out to your email and attach it. So it is a time-saving feature if you do want to send those POs out. I know that some of you, it's more just an internal process and for your own records, and you don't send them out. But just keep that in mind that you can do that through Paperless Office. Okay. So now we're going to move to the setup of the purchase order module. And I want to show you a couple of items which is going to tie in to our subject a little bit later. When you go into the purchase order options, actually the first three things that you have within the purchase order options are the days to retain completed purchase orders. Now, this one is set to 0, which is probably not the best setting. The maximum number that you can have in there is 999 days. How this works is once a purchase order is completed, and for a PO to be completed in Sage 100, it expects it to be fully received and fully invoiced, so that if you order 10, you've received 10 in, and that the invoicing that you receive for the vendor, even if it's multiple invoices, you've been invoiced for all 10. So when you do period end processing at the end of a month, it goes out when you're doing that period end processing, and it's going to look at this information to see how long you're wanting to retain the completed POs. If that PO was completed more than 999 days ago, then it is going to purge that PO out of your system. Now, what you'll find is a lot of folks don't do period end processing in purchase order, so that the completed POs hang out there forever. So we'll talk a little bit about how to clean those up in a bit. But if you find that your POs hang out there forever, then probably you're not doing period end processing. Now, if you set this to 0 days, which mine was set originally, and I did a period end processing, any closed PO, even if I closed it 5 days ago, it's going to purge it out of the system. So you may want them to remain in your system a little while longer. You have an option to automatically close partially received purchase orders as well. And the reason that that feature is in there is that a lot of times folks might regularly order large quantities of an item, and there are typically overages or shortages, which might be inherent with the product packaging. So that happens a lot if you're getting, a tanker full of something, whether it's a dry good or a liquid, and maybe you order 10,000 gallons, but on that truck that comes in, you get 9,998 gallons. Well, you want that purchase order to be completed because they're not going to send you 2 more gallons on a separate truck. So you can tell it to partially close received purchase orders if your business is one that would benefit from that. And then also you can give it a percentage. If I've received 90% of the order, then it's okay to go ahead and complete it. So if I click this box, then it opens up this field below. So again, you don't have to use that option, but there are some types of businesses that that's very important so that they can get those partially received POs completed. And then one of the most common issues in the purchase order module is integrating it with your AP invoices. So for those of you familiar with the process, if you have your purchase order basically posting AP invoices, then if you've issued a purchase order to a vendor, when that item comes in, you are going to need to do a receipt of invoice in the purchase order module. If you forget and enter that invoice in AP, then that purchase order is never going to close. And again, we're going to take a look, a real close look, and kind of dig into why POs remain open. And this could be one of the issues, is that someone has accidentally keyed a purchase or keyed an invoice directly into AP and not associated it with the purchase order. So I did want to briefly talk about those items in the setup. You also can see on the right the different modules that the purchase order will integrate with. It integrates with your general ledger. It will integrate with inventory. Now, you do not have to have inventory management to use the PO module. If you don't have inventory, then you would use miscellaneous items to set up in your system and manage your purchase orders. If you do use job cost, you can integrate job cost with purchase order. You can integrate bank rec with purchase order, and you can also integrate work order with purchase order. So just wanted to briefly touch base on those items. And Dee Dee, do we have any questions about any of the things that I covered in the setup?
Not at this time.
Okay, thank you. All right.
You're welcome.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually get into the purchases clearing report. And if none of you have ever, if you're actively using the PO module and you've never looked at a purchases clearing report, then you might want to go out and run it. You might be kind of shocked at what you see on the report. But what I'm going to do, there's two variations. There's the purchases clearing, and then there's the purchases clearing in the open PO format. I'm going to preview the first one, which is the purchases clearing report. And when it pops up, I'll make it a little bit larger on the screen so that it's easier for all of us to read. But if you'll take a look, you'll see the open purchase orders, and it gives you the reason basically why it's open. So on this particular PO, it's PO 10,003, and it gives you the order date, and then below that it gives you the item code and the description. But if you look to the right, you're going to see the quantity that was ordered on that purchase order, the quantity that was received, and the quantity that was invoiced. So again, going back, Sage 100 is going to consider a PO complete when it's been fully received and fully invoiced. So when it has that 100 have been received and 100 have been invoiced, then it's going to consider that to be closed. And it's going to give you a report total down here at the bottom. So I'm going to close out of this for just a moment. I'm going to show you the other report. And this is going to give us just a little more detail. So you can see that this breaks it down a little bit more for you, and it also includes miscellaneous items that might be on a purchase order. But it's also going to then show you the quantity ordered, the quantity received, and how many might be on back order. It's also going to show you, at the line below it, it breaks it out a little differently, how many were invoiced. So in this instance, actually this PO is complete because actually that PO should not be complete. They've probably forced that completion unless they're accepting partially received. Because this one you can see that we ordered 5, we received 2, and we invoiced 2. So they may have gone back and changed that original order. But you can see here that they ordered 20, they received 20, and that they were invoiced for 20. So this report is a longer report, and you can also see that down here at the bottom it shows you the total purchases clearing, and then the total purchases clearing plus the special and miscellaneous items. So this total purchases clearing, this report total should match the other report that we were looking at because it does not include the miscellaneous items. And this total purchases clearing should match my GL account related to purchases clearing. So we are going to go in and take a look at that GL account number. And just to show you where that GL account number is set, in inventory management, under setup, if you go into your product line maintenance, and I'm just going to pull up one of my product lines. If I go to the accounts tab, you will see the purchases clearing account for that particular product line. So I'm going to go to my general ledger, and I'm just going to go into my account maintenance and look at that account and look at my ending balance, which obviously is nowhere near what my report showed. So that is a very common issue. Now again, I am using demo data, but I'll give you a couple of examples which you can actually see within this screen why my purchases clearing does not match my general ledger. So an out of balance between the purchases clearing and your general ledger can happen for some of the following reasons. You did an inventory receipt directly in the transaction entry in the inventory module. So instead of doing the receipt of goods in PO, someone went into inventory and did a transaction. You can see right here that there is an inventory transaction that was $171,000. You also can see that someone did an adjustment in an inventory transaction. So those types of things, if someone's going into the inventory module and making an adjustment that affects the purchases clearing, you might and probably will be out of balance. By the same token, if somebody goes directly into the general ledger and makes an adjustment to that purchases clearing account, it's not going to affect that report that we just looked at. Another issue could be that the quantity, the ordered quantity or the unit cost is changed after performing either the receipt of goods or the receipt of invoice entry. So if you are getting a receipt of goods or receipt of invoice and the numbers are different, if you don't modify them on the original PO, then that can cause an out of balance. Manual postings have been updated to the purchases clearing account. Again, that can be through the general ledger, as we already mentioned. It also could be that your receipt of goods or your receipt of invoice register was updated to an incorrect GL period. So, maybe you did the receipt of invoice in March, but you used a posting date of February for the daily transaction register. So that also can cause an issue. So to touch base on how transactions, we talked about that the purchases clearing account is defined in the inventory product maintenance. so that it knows what account to hit. But then you're wondering, you may be wondering, well, actually, how do things get in the purchases clearing and how do they come out of the purchases clearing? So when you issue a purchase order and just do a purchase order entry, there is no effect on the GL whatsoever. The only thing that's going to be tracked is it will track in history, in your PO history. If you're looking in inventory, possibly at your inventory inquiry, it will show you how many of a certain item are on a purchase order. It'll show how many are on PO, how many are on a sales order, how many are on back order, and how many are committed, as well as how many you have on hand. So it affects that as well, but there's no impact at all on your general ledger. So when you are ready to receive in a purchase order, and I'll go in and we'll actually run through one in just a second, but when you go through to do a receipt of goods, when you do the receipt of goods, what it does is the purchases clearing account is credited when you receive the item, and it goes into your inventory. Then when you do a receipt of invoice from the vendor, it then debits the purchases clearing. So the purchases clearing really should just be an in and out account, so that whatever you're receiving in, it hits the purchases clearing. When you get the invoice from the vendor, then it's debiting that account, and it should all be a wash. So as you can see, when you look at that purchases clearing report, and what you may be finding when you look at it, you might have invoices out there from 2010, and maybe the situation is that you you ordered 10, you received 5, you were invoiced for 5, but you know that you're never going to get those other, you're not going to receive the other 5 from 2010. So you really don't want those on your report, and you're never going to receive it. So then you're thinking, okay, the purchase order is on a back order status, so how do I get rid of that? I can't go back in because it's on back order. I can't change the amount, the quantity, and that type of thing. So what has happened over the past several years is that Sage has built in a lot of utilities to purge out purchase orders, to clean up old POs that need to be removed from the system. For those of you that have been on the system for a long time, if you remember, it used to be several steps to purge out old purchase orders. Well, they've made it a lot easier, but what I would suggest, instead of just going into one of these utilities, which under the purchase order module, you have a folder called Utilities, and you'll actually see where you can do several things in here. You can purge completed POs, you can purge expired master or repeating orders, you can purge completed or canceled PO recaps, obsolete purchase orders, you can actually purge your PO history, you can purge your PO receipt history, and you can purge purchases history by item and vendor, or you can actually now recreate your purchase order history if you accidentally purge and didn't mean to. This you used to, once they were gone, they were gone, so this is a nice feature that they've added. But what I would suggest to you is that instead of just arbitrarily going in and purging everything, I would go in and look at my purchases clearing report and try to determine why those POs are still open. Now again, if they're several years old, you know that you're going to want to purge them out. You don't need to probably spend that much time. But let's say you have some purchase orders from last year, and you really want to determine why are they still open. Is there a situation where maybe you have a change in staff, and they do not realize, or they have forgotten, that you need to do a receipt of invoice in the purchase order module versus in AP. So is there an opportunity there for additional training for your staff so that you can work with them and determine why that PO is still open? And just, take a close look at it. Now, one of the things that when you do go through and purge this information, it is going to purge it from your history. It is not going to make a GL entry to offset your general ledger, the purchases clearing account. So you do want to make sure that whatever you're purging out, and if it's to get your purchases clearing cleaned up and in line, that you are going to have to go in and make an adjustment in the general ledger to that purchases clearing account. So I'm going to walk through a receipt of goods and a receipt of invoice. But Dee Dee, do you have any questions at this point?
No, so far
okay.
Everyone is getting it.
Well, again, okay, great, thank you. Well, again, everyone, if you do have questions, if you'll just use the question feature in the GoToWebinar, and Dee Dee will be monitoring that throughout the presentation. So let's go in and actually just take a look at the receipt of goods and the receipt of invoice process. So I'm going to go in real quickly, and I'm going to just do a purchase order and put several items on it and just do a standard order. So we will just run through this really quickly. All right, so I've issued my PO. So I'm going to go ahead and click Accept. So when the merchandise is received, what you're going to do is in the purchase order module, you're going to go into material requisition, you're going to go into, you're going to go into receipt of goods. We're going to talk about returns in just a minute. So you're going to go into the receipt of goods entry. And when you go into the receipt of goods entry, you can also have batches. I do not have batch entry turned on, but you can do batch entry if you have multiple staff members doing receipt of goods. And it's going to ask you for a receipt number, so I'm just going to assign the next receipt number. And then it's going to pop up and it's going to ask me for the purchase order number, so you can either key it in or you can do a lookup and grab that purchase order. And you will go to the Lines tab. Actually, let me show you something else real quick here, because it won't show me when I go back to the screen. Let me do one more thing, guys. Whoops. I wanted to show you a field that is on the screen here. Okay. You'll notice when I put in the purchase order number, one of the fields that is right next to that says Invoice Number. So if you put in an invoice number here, then basically what the system is going to do is it is processing the receipt of goods and the receipt of invoice at the same time. So instead of having it 2 steps, you have it 1 step. Now, a lot of times you don't have that invoice at the time you get the merchandise in, or you may have those duties segregated so that maybe someone in your warehouse does the receipt of goods. And then when that invoice comes in, it goes into AP. So then they would do the second step would be the receipt of invoice. So just wanted to show you what we're going to do is only the receipt of goods. So I'm going to leave this invoice number blank. Then when I go to my Lines tab, it's going to ask me if I want to receive it complete. If you say yes to this, it's going to populate all of the items on the purchase order, and whatever the order quantity was, it's going to show that as the received quantity. If I say no to this, it's still going to put in the items and the amount ordered, but received is going to be 0. So it's just a personal preference if you want to receive it complete or not. If you do say yes and it fills it in, you can always go in and change that before you update it. So what you're going to do is put in how many you've received, and we'll go in here, and on this particular item, I picked an item that has a lot number instead of it. and you may also have serialized items. If you have that, once you receive it in, it's going to require you to put in a lot number or a serial number. And that way, and then when you sell it, when it comes out of sales order, it's going to also have you put in the lot or the serial number that you're selling it from. So you can tell on the second item, it allowed me to put in a quantity received of 1. It did not pop up the window where I had to give it a lot or serial item. So that is all based on the valuation method of that particular item and the way you have it set up in inventory. So I have my receipt. I'm going to go into my totals, and I'm just going to go ahead and accept it. At this point, this is where I would go in and update my receipt of goods. So I can either click on my icon at the bottom and go through that process if I've closed out, or maybe whoever does the receipts is not allowed to update them until someone else reviews them. You can also go to the daily receipt register /update, and it takes you to the very same screen. So you'll see that my demo data is in a future date, so it's not going to let me post to 2016 because I'm not in 2016 anymore. So I'll just go in and put in a bogus date here. And I'm going to just take that out to my PDF printer. Actually, I think I have rights where I can just update from a preview. So you can see that on my receipt of goods register, it's showing what I'm receiving. It's giving me a total. Exit out of here. If I allow back orders, it'll ask if I want to print or back order fill report so that I can see who's waiting on that item. So you have the option to say yes or no there. And then when you're finished, it'll ask if you want to update the receipt of goods. When I say yes to this, then what it's doing is it is actually then adding those items to my inventory. Then, as most of you know, there's 2 steps to most every update within Sage 100. The second update is the daily transaction register. And this is what is going to post to the general ledger. And you can see that what this is doing with that receipt of goods only is that it's debiting my inventory and it's crediting purchases clearing. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and exit out of here, and then it's going to ask me if I want to update it. I'm going to say yes. So that purchase order now has been partially received. When you get the invoice in, then you're going to go into the receipt of invoice. You're going to give it a receipt number. You're going to select the purchase order number. And then you do need to put in an invoice number. And I'm going to go ahead and make my invoice date in 2020. I'm going to go to my Lines tab, and I'm going to get the same message that I received before. Now do I want to invoice the complete purchase order? If I say yes to this, the other one I said no to, so I'll show you what happens if you say yes. Then what it does is it makes the quantity invoiced the same as the quantity ordered. Sometimes your purchase order might have 80 line items on it, and maybe you're being invoiced for all 80 line items except for 1. It's much easier to say yes and have it populate this, scroll down and find the 1 line item that you're not being invoiced for and change that 1 line item, then saying no to this and then having to fill out this invoiced column on 79 lines. So whatever works for you, you just want to make sure that you're paying attention if you're not being invoiced for the full amount. So we'll just go on this one and say that they are invoicing us. We haven't received everything, but they are invoicing us the full amount. So we're going to go to our Totals tab. We're going to click Accept. And then at this point, there's another update process. And we are going to then print that daily receipt register, which is going to be for the invoice. So you can see here what we're being invoiced. Again, you do not have to do them one at a time as I'm doing in this example. So you may have pages of invoices. You'll notice on the register what source journal it's using and the number if you need to go back and look at it. And it's also going to give you your journal posting date. So I'm going to exit out of here. And then it gives me a daily purchases journal as well, which is talking about the AP portion of it. So I'm going to close out of here. And if you're tracking sales tax on your purchases, you're also going to get a daily purchases tax journal summary. And then finally we get, are we ready to update? So we're going to say yes to this. Now when I update this, it's going to reflect in the PO history that it's been updated in the receipt history. It is also going to write that invoice to the accounts payable module. So on the daily transaction register, you can see now that it is debiting the purchases clearing, and it's crediting the AP trade account, and then also we have the miscellaneous expense there as well that I had on there. So we're going to go ahead and update this. So now if I go to the accounts payable module and I go in and look at my vendor maintenance and I pull up my vendor, you will see the invoice that I just keyed in through the purchase order module. And if I drill down into that invoice, which I did by double clicking, then you can also see the source journal that it came from, that it was issued, that it was generated through purchase order and not through AP. So if you're ever looking at an invoice and you're wanting to know if it went through the purchase order module or the AP module, some of these older ones, they don't have the history in, but it'll show you an AP source journal instead of a PO source journal, so you know exactly whether it went in through purchase order or AP. So again, going back to the purchase order module and looking at these utilities, if you say that you wanted to purge completed purchase orders, it's going to come up and say remove purchase orders completed on or before 990 days prior to, and it's defaulting to today's date. If you can set this date further back so that it will keep more than 999 days, but where this days is pulling from is from my setup. If you remember earlier in the session on the PO options, this was actually set to 0, and I changed it to 999. I'm going to set it back to 0 and go back into the screen, and you'll see that it pulled up 0 days prior to. So if I proceeded right now, any purchase order that was completed on or before today is going to be completely removed from my history. So again, you may not want to do that. You may want to keep that PO out there in your history for a while. But that's up to you. But that's where that day, the number of days is pulling from, is your setup. Again, you can use any number between 0 and 999. But when you do, if you do period end processing in purchase order, when you go into the period end processing, it is also going to only keep the history, because it will purge history for the number of days that you have set in the options. Hopefully that makes sense, but sometimes people won't really understand what the number of days means, so they set it to a really low number. You have that same situation in accounts payable for days to, to keep paid invoices. So you do want to kind of take a look at that before you start cleaning things up. So again,
Pam.
Yes.
Pam, I have a question.
Yes.
The question is, there's an old PO from 2007 that I need to remove from the open POs. Which purge option should I select?
So it's an old open PO. I would use the probably the purge obsolete POs, and you would give it a date, but then where it says purchase order number, instead of saying all, that you would do an equal to, so that you're just selecting that one purchase order and purging it out that way. And again, you need to take a look and see, by looking at that purchases clearing report, what effect that has had on your GL, so that you know if there's anything that you need to clean up. But you can do it this way by doing an equal to. The others, if you do just, yeah, this is completed or canceled POs, and this is basically just the recap file. It's not actually the actual purchase order. So you, I would use this one to purge the obsolete purchase orders, where you can select a specific one. So if that didn't answer their question, just send a note back to Dee Dee.
They said, great, thank you.
Okay, you're very welcome. Are there any other questions at this point?
Not right at this time.
Okay, all right. Well, folks, we are going to be wrapping up in a minute, so if you do have some questions, be sure and send them through. And I think the last thing that we're going to talk about is, I know that when I do the pre-upgrade analysis and folks use purchase order, I'll ask if they use the return of goods. And a lot of times people don't use the return of goods feature, and I'm not sure if they actually realize that it's there. But let's say that you receive in an order, and maybe that order was damaged, and you either didn't catch it before you received it, or you brought it in and you set it up and realized that there was something missing or there were parts missing and you need to ship it back. Once you do that receipt of goods, it brings it into your inventory. So to remove it from your inventory and to have it properly, you know, go through all the processes, instead of just doing it as a transaction in inventory, you can actually do a return of goods. And that is, on the PO module, there's a folder that's for material requisition and return. And if you do a return of goods, you're going to get a very similar screen like a receipt of goods. You're going to assign it a return number. If your vendor has given you an authorization number for the return, you can key it in, because there's actually a specific return form that will print with this that you can put with that merchandise when you're shipping it back, and it will reference that authorization number on that form. And then you're going to put in the purchase order number. We'll just grab this last one we did. You can also reference the invoice number if you want it to also deduct from the invoice in AP if you've already done a receipt of invoice. And then we're going to go to lines. It's going to say, do I want to return the complete purchase order? I'm going to say no. But let's say that we're returning one of these. What's going to happen is, after I go through my update process, it is going to then put that item back on the PO, thinking that we're still going to receive it. It's going to remove it from the inventory, and it will also affect your purchases clearing account. So I'm going to go ahead and just do a quick print here real quick. And I have to give it a lot number. Whoops. Do this one. That's what I used. Okay, now we'll do quick print. Yes. Okay. This form may not be very pretty, but because this is just a standard form, but you can see that it says return order on it. You know, you can drop your logo if you have special instructions or anything that you want to put on a return order. You can also see where it put the RMA number in there as well. And it will then show you what is being returned. Now, what I didn't do is I left all the items on that return order, which I think probably would be kind of confusing to my vendor. So what I should have done is I'm going to go to that back to that return. I'm going to go to the lines tab, and the second line that I'm not going to be returning, I'm just going to highlight it and then click the little X and actually remove it from this form. Then I'll go back. I'll say yes, I want to save the changes. And now if you look at the form, it's going to make a lot more sense when you're sending it back. So you can see that I removed it. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't remove any lines from the original purchase order. It's only removing that line from this return. But then you can print this and, like I said, you know, put it with the merchandise that you're shipping back. So when you do the return of goods, you still have the same process where you can click the icon, the printer icon here at the bottom right, or up here you have the return order register and update. Takes you to the same place, but you need to go through the process. So you are going to update the return, and I will go through and just preview this real quick. Okay, because I've already printed it, let me just go here. But you still need to go through and update it, and then you'll also have the daily transaction register as well, where you're going to update that too. So I did want to show you that return feature. So let me just look back and make sure that we've covered most of the things that I wanted to talk about today. So if you've never looked at purchases clearing, don't freak out when you look at it, because there probably will be issues. So you know, feel free to go through the looking at the purge features. You can also, just to show you real quickly, yes, I want to update this. Yeah, I'll wait and do that later. If you're going in and you're wondering, well, when would I use, like, let's say, you know, purge obsolete purchase orders, or if I go back to this purge completed purchase orders. Any screen that you go in, you have this little icon at the bottom right, and I can do about this window, and then it's going to actually bring information in and kind of give me an explanation. You know, where it says this is the field removed days before certain days, it tells you where that pulls from. There are probably some better options in here with a little more instructions. Let's see. Yeah, this one gives you just a little more data, but feel free to use the helps features, because it will provide a lot of information to you. So you can go through and look at some of those different areas, and it will provide some additional information. So, Dee Dee, I'll open it up at this point to see if anyone else has any questions.
No, not at this time. We don't.
Okay. Well, everyone, we're finishing up just a couple of minutes early. Maybe you can take an early lunch and enjoy this gorgeous weather we're having today. So I would like to thank everyone. Dee Dee, our next webinar, do you have the date of that webinar?
Yes. Yes, we have 3 webinars coming up in April. On April 13th, we'll be doing BizNet Desktop, excuse me. On April 19th, we'll be doing tips and tricks for Sage 100. We'll be talking about General Ledger. And on April 20th, we'll be doing Sage Alerts and Workflow. So those are the 3 most current coming up in the future. So we hope you'll join us.
Okay, thank you. And the Sage Alerts and Workflow, for those of you that might be familiar with the terminology, it used to be called Knowledge Sync. and it's now called Sage 100 Alerts and Workflow. So you might, if you're not currently using that product, that would be a great webinar to attend. So I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. And if you have any additional questions, or if you get into needing to clean up your open purchase orders or things that are on back order and need assistance, please reach out to our help desk at 429-6902, and it's extension 221. And any of our technicians and consultants can help you with that process. So thank you all very much, and have a great day.
Yes, thank you for joining. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.